Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. You're on the Steady Coach. Welcome back for another success story. I love recording success stories, and it is always a special privilege to get to record a success story with someone who I got to know personally and was able to help personally. Scott is one of those people. Scott was a member of our coaching group and was also an amazing mentor, which means that he used his own experiences recovering from PPPD to help other people who are newer to the recovery process. So he has a bunch of wisdom and insights to share in this conversation. His symptoms started at the end of 2022, about fall of 2022, and he, after a few months, was diagnosed with PPPD. Fortunately for him, he was given a relatively good prognosis by his doctors. His doctors gave him ideas for what he could do to get better. He relatively early found my channel and was able to recover. Today, Scott is basically fully recovered, back to playing golf and traveling and doing all the things that he loves to do. I think, as always, you'll get a lot out of hearing this inspirational story. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and comments. Please do leave comments. Let me know that you like hearing success stories. That motivates me to keep making these for you. Also, you can like, share, subscribe to my channel. These things help me reach more people. Or if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can give the podcast a follow and a 5-star rating if you think we deserve it. Again, those things help me reach more people. All right. Enjoy this great conversation with Scott. All right, Scott, welcome. We're back. And as I said previously, I'm just so delighted to see you. It's so good to see your face.
Great to see you as well.
Well, I'm happy also to have you here to share your story. So let's jump right in with that. There actually may be people watching who've already seen some of you in some of our mentor panels, but I'd love it for those who don't know you, if you could just share a little bit about yourself to start.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm 61 years old. I'm a banker in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. My wife and I are parents of 25-year-old triplets. I'm originally from North Central West Virginia, but have been in the D.C. area for over 30 years.
Mhm.
But I love to be outdoors, just like to be active. Just really like to be busy. I think one thing that I've shared with you during the past couple of years while working through this, my wife and I have been building a house in Ireland, so travel has been a big part of our lives, and it's actually been a good way to sort of monitor where I am with our travels.
Yeah. Yeah. And another little fact that I think may end up arising here in the conversation is that your wife is also a physician.
That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's start from the beginning. How did all the neural circuit dizziness stuff get started?
Yeah, it's funny. I looking back at things, I say now that before everything started, when I was well, I realize now I wasn't completely well. I knew the sort of the 6 month lead up to when sensations started. Um, I just wasn't feeling that great. I wasn't feeling terrible, but I just wasn't feeling great. But it really all started October of 2022. It was in the process of moving my father into a new home after my mother had passed away about a year before. It was a stressful time. We were had been several weekends in a row getting him moved, and put him to bed one night. Went upstairs to get myself to go to bed, and just the world started moving. It was like I was on a boat, and I remember when I got into bed and just seemed like the whole room was moving, and didn't rest very well that night. Got up the next morning, drove back from West Virginia to DC. Um, that night, um, I slept fine, but when I woke up the next morning, I had what I would call a very, very brief bout of vertigo. Very brief, probably seconds, like 5 seconds, but it was spinning vertigo that woke me up. And fortunately it stopped. The good news, it stopped. But from that point forward, I was just constantly feeling the sensation of moving. So that's how it started, and yeah, that from October through November, it was just sort of a gradual uh, decline. I was getting more and more nervous, and more and more doctor appointments, that kind of stuff. Um, where by December, I was barely functional. Yeah, it was sort of the whole breadth of things. I, I could not lay down flat, couldn't lay on my side. I had very intense light and sound sensitivity, couldn't look at screens, couldn't go in grocery stores, just really had a hard time uh, moving at all, sort of by this December time period. Yeah, I remember there strange sensations just it was kind of everywhere, but mostly head, neck, and whatnot. But the strangest thing was sort of abdominal and into my upper thighs, particularly my left leg, just felt twisted and strange, and to the point where it was very difficult to stand up or walk, and all the while uh, my head was pulling me to the left, and I was feeling the bobbing sensation. So that's how it started, and yeah, it was yeah that was the roughest period of time, sort of that October through, I'll call it December, January period.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So at that time, it sounds like the sensations you're experiencing were 24/7. Is that accurate? Or did you get any respite from them by resting or sitting down?
Yeah, early on, I would say it probably wasn't 24/7, but I think it was the more the more I dug into, what's going on and the medical world. Ultimately, I would say by, late November, it was all the time. It
It was
was
all the
all the
time.
time. Yeah, and
Okay.
it was pretty much constant from, yeah, late November forward.
Okay. I hear stories like yours so often, and it never loses its impact on me imagining this going on. And I mean, just having gotten to know you, Scott, it seems like, please correct me if I'm wrong, you're a relatively measured, level-headed person. So it's not like you're the type who would fly into flurries of anxiety and freak out mode. It sounds like this was just so intensely uncomfortable and scary that you really it would have freaked anyone out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Scary is the right word. Is it just because I think the thing is it seemed like it was coming at me from so many different angles. There were it was head, it was when I got into sort of how kind of called the medical merry-go-round. I went to my GP several times, and actually shortly after I got back from that trip, I remember I did have a sinus infection, and it had been prescribed antibiotics, and I was yeah I picked him up at noontime, took the antibiotics. About 4 o'clock, I had reacted really badly and got tachycardic and left the office in an ambulance. That was my
Oh,
first of two ER runs,
oh my
but
gosh.
it was I think it was a product of just a lot of that concern and worry about what all was going on, because I was feeling all these sensations. Plus, I did have a sinus infection at the time that took a while to be diagnosed and treated. But yeah, it's the yeah. But I guess when I saw my general practitioner several times, and I had so many different complaints. It was head, neck, stomach, everything. He was like, I can't send you to every specialist. So that took a while. I ultimately did go to several different specialists, several ENTs, gastroenterologist, neurologist, cardiologist, neuro, um, neurophysical therapist. It was but it took a while to get through that. It really took from kind of November into it was really late January before I got through all of that. And every time I would go to another one, I would get more and more, I say, nervous and concerned. because nobody had an answer. That was the
Mm.
good news. You always, every time I walk away from the doctor's office, I would get the message, "You're fine. We can't really find anything." I did get several hints of diagnoses, all sorts of things. The cervicogenic dizziness was one. The vestibular migraine. Uh, the yeah, there. Oh, I remember well. Somebody suggested it might be POTS. I didn't know what that was, and long COVID was suggested, but I was still functioning, but it was hard to function. And I think the one thing that made some sense to me was vestibular migraine, and because I had a history of migraine headaches, and so I that was probably uh, for right or wrong, I I was in the course of doing neurophysical therapy, which was at least getting me moving some. But I picked up a book about migraines, and I sort of forced myself to read it. I remember because I was doing the some of the uh, vestibular rehab therapy at my kitchen table. I had this one spot that I would sit in because I could be fairly comfortable with the lighting and whatnot. But in order to read, I hadn't really read for a while because I just wasn't comfortable. But I literally was propping myself up to read the book. It was a good book, fortunately, and I think it helped me. It just thinking about what might be going on. It gave me some hope that maybe something I could
Could be
figure
done. Hmm.
out. And I think it helped a little bit. Because I think there probably was a component there of things that cause migraines and that helped me a little bit, but I still wasn't moving a bunch. This was probably January time frame. And,
Okay.
I was kind of, yeah, I try not to make this too long, but I was kind of in between a neurology consult and a cardiology consult, still seeing my neurophysical therapist. I was in a neuro PT one day and I was having chest pain, and she just stopped. She got really nervous. She's like, "You got to go see a cardiologist," which really freaked me out. And so I had an appointment with a cardiologist. And of course, that morning I got up. I was very nervous about going to see the cardiologist. I get in the shower. We've got the black and white tiles. All of a sudden, the shower starts spinning. And next thing I know, I'm on the bedroom floor. Ambulance is being called again.
Oh,
And so I ended up going to the ER, spent the morning there, still made it to my cardiology appointment around noon, but I was wiped. I was exhausted. But good news was the cardiologist said I was fit as a fiddle. You're great, you're fine. He was the most reassuring doctor I had through. He was like, "You're fine. You just need to calm down." But it was so interestingly, I made it through that day. But I was really spent after that, and I still wasn't getting any suggestions of why the world was bobbing and moving up and down. Um, but
can I just interject here and say what you're describing? uh, Okay, a couple things. So many things are coming to mind, but a couple things for right now. First of all, this like this like specialist box, like passing you off from specialist to specialist, and each one like giving you the stamp of approval on like the one little system that they specialize in. That is so part of the problem here, because every time you go, there's this whole like cycle of panic and anxiety about like, what are we going to find? Oh no, now I have to go see a cardiologist. Now I have to see a neurologist. I have to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Now I have to see a PT. Now I have to see this kind of doctor, that kind of doctor. And each one, you have to tell the whole story all over again. They put you through a bunch of tests. They poke you, they prod you. I don't know. I can't find anything wrong. Let me pass you off to the next person down the line. And in the meantime, you're like, but guys, can you not see that I'm like a complete wreck? I have like my entire world is disorienting me right now. And that adds so much to the fear and the anxiety and the dread and the danger that actually is what you later learned is actually what's perpetuating symptoms, regardless of what started them. Could have been the sinus infection, could have been a weird migraine, could have been, who knows, just a blip in your inner ear for no particular reason. But when we funnel people into a system that does what you're describing, it really, for a lot of people, makes things become a chronic problem.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And one thing I think I was really fortunate because I did see a lot of good doctors, and I was lucky. I'm in an area where I could see a lot of really
Hmm.
good physicians, and I think they were all really good at what they did. And the I think ultimately um, that paid some dividends. But you're right, everybody was sort of in their own lane. Think it was probably, yeah, when it was right around March. I had actually discovered your site early March. And I think that might have been the first place I ever read about triple PD. And I was hearing other people's stories, which for the first time in 5 months, I heard something that was relatable, and I heard a description of something that really sounded like what I was experiencing. Interestingly, it was a couple weeks after. I think I'd already started your free course. I had an appointment with a doctor at GW University. He was a really good ENT, and I got into his office and sat down. And it was very short consult, but he said, "Tell me when." He said, "When you're sitting still, do you feel like you're moving?" And I said, "Yes." And he just very straightforward. He said, "Your ears can't do that." And I was like, "Wow, okay, that's interesting." And then he handed me a sheet of paper that described triple PD. And so now his approach was typical medical approach was very low dose of, I think it was Zoloft, I think what it was. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go there. So I actually consulted with a psychiatrist to see if that would make sense. I had been prescribed Effexor when I was seeing the neurologist, which didn't go well, and ultimately decided not to do that. I think that was born a couple things. One, I was realizing that I was sort of intellectualizing too much. I was thinking way too much about all the different things, and um, but I was also kind of learning through the free course. I was making some progress doing. I remember I was doing the vestibular rehab therapy, the saccades. I remember I got carried playing cards with me everywhere,
Oh.
and and it was helping. And I had a setup at home, and I had a setup at the office to do that, and that I think over a period of 30 to 60 days helped. It got me moving, but so I ultimately decided not to do any meds. Um, I was still not completely done with the medical route. I was sort of straddling the fence, and
Sure.
I had ultimately had another appointment set up with a physician at Hopkins that doctor had recommended. I was leaning in, and I was starting to understand things, but I was still very um, I was dubious about just kind of the emotional side, which the things that I was learning, going through your free course. Um, so it wasn't quite there yet, but that became really important to be bought into that.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I had a comment on my channel recently. I can't remember which video it was about. It was one where I was talking about anxiety and fear specifically. And the commenter said something like, "So you're saying that it's always an emotional problem and like we shouldn't do anything else?" Because that's what I did a bunch of physical things and that helped me. And I said, "No, that's not what I'm saying. All symptoms are biopsychosocial, and doing physical things are pretty much universally helpful for people with PPPD. Getting moving, for example, is a non negotiable part of getting better. It's just that, as you saw, often the physical stuff will only take you so far. And power to the people for whom just vestibular rehab therapy does it. Great. that's fine with me. Whatever helps people get better. But as you were straddling the line there, you probably saw you're hitting kind of a ceiling, so to speak, in terms of how much better you could get.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Actually, you just reminded me of something that I remember. One of the things that was really helpful because I was of course reading stories like these and watching the videos, recovery stories, and I'll never forget this when um, Mario made a comment that that um, 1 hour of gardening was equal to or better than 3 hours of VRT. And I'm like, well, that's it. I'm just going to spend more time in the yard. And I did, and it did help. It got me moving. Wasn't comfortable early on. I was still struggling to walk that well, but I started doing yard work, and just getting moving was really important.
Yeah, very, very true. I mean, this should be part of everyone's recovery. It's just if it were adequate, I promise I wouldn't be talking about emotions. I don't want to talk about emotions either. I don't want to do that either. But it would be all exercise. But it just happens that this seems to be a non-negotiable for a lot of people. So, okay, so you went to Hopkins, you saw the doctor there, and what was the outcome or the recommendations from that?
Yeah, he said the same thing. It was the low dose Zoloft, but he was I would say very very engaging and he was really curious about it. And he basically said up front, he said, "There's a lot about this we don't understand,"
Mhm.
and he was he was really kind of open to a lot of different things. When I told him I really wasn't that interested in the meds, he understood that, and he was actually curious some of the things I was telling him about, some of the things that I was learning through your program, and he was curious about that. I to his credit, but so I really didn't. That didn't change anything. What that did, that visit, I sort of had pegged that as that's it. That's the last hurdle to jump, and because I just wanted to hear what he had to say. It wasn't that different, but I felt at that point I thought, okay, I'm done with the medical route,
Mhm.
physical medical route, I'll say. And I was at that point. So I think I started your actual course in May. That was August of last year, of 23, and at that point, I think I was pretty much bought in to, okay, I need to pursue the rest of this. And I know we in the community, a lot of times we use the word woo woo, and I was, my initial reaction was cuckoo. And it was,
Thank you
but
for saying that.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that, honestly, I think what really, I think the things that made some sense to me early after the VRT, because I think that was about the first 60 days. Then it was more the parasympathetic breathing. I really found that helpful, and and I started your somatic walking, and this was a point I really wasn't walking that well, and it was a struggle to walk that far. But I started walking my neighborhood and the woods around our neighborhood, and I noticed that made a difference. I was I was it was that feedback, internally. I could see that things were changing, and it doesn't change fast, or it didn't change fast for me. God bless the people it changes fast, but for me, what I was noticing was progress. Looking back 30 days or looking back 40 days, I was definitely seeing progress, and so I sort of adopted that as my attitude is, I'm just going to keep doing this, and I'll look back for progress as it occurs. And that, I know we talk a lot in the program about we have to follow process goals, not outcome goals. And it took me a while to figure out what that meant, but that's what it meant to me. Is I just had to stay the course and follow the process. I did a lot of reading early on, and that was, I think it was Alan Gordon's book that talked about follow the process. And I'd read that about the same time. And so I bought into it because I was seeing progress, but it was, and if I look back 60 days or even further, I could see a progression. It wasn't a steady uphill progression. It was up and back, up and back, up and back, but ultimately it was an upward progression.
Yes. And I credit this to you, the recommendation I now give to people, because look, we know the reason you're here watching this or listening to this is because you or a loved one wants to get rid of symptoms. So like for me to then ask you, okay, I want you to not focus on actually getting better from your symptoms. We can all reasonably assume that that is the ultimate reason why you're doing a lot of this. You want to feel physically better. You just don't want to be constantly monitoring that. And so, Scott, I remember you saying something like, I check in about my symptoms like every 30 to 60 days. And if I see, and so month over month, I will often see a change. If I were doing that every day or every week, it would just drive you nuts because there are just so many ups and downs. And you could drive yourself crazy just trying to figure out what triggers you and what doesn't and what's happening. So I'm wondering, could you give us some examples of the process goals that you followed more closely? Because people often say, okay, fine, I won't monitor symptoms, but now how am I supposed to know I'm getting better?
Yeah, yeah. So movement was one, just in and of itself, just moving, even when it was hard. And
Hmm.
so that was definitely one. I already, mentioned the breathing. That just sort of became the, a go to all the time. Yeah, and that's true up until today, and it probably will be forever.
So
Um,
regardless of what symptoms were there or weren't there, you were just practicing
yes,
taking time to just de-escalate whatever was going on.
right, right.
Hmm.
And you know, for me, journaling was important early on, and that did go to the emotional side of things
Hmm.
and I didn't really realize I think I've spent my whole life sort of intellectual. I call it living from the neck up. Thinking about
That's right.
things and um, and not really processing what I was feeling, and candidly looking back at that, what was going on before my sensations started. There was a lot. There was a lot going on that wasn't great, and I was burying it internally. And I know that now, and it resulted in not just the dizziness. There was I had a lot of physical discomfort, pain at different places, and so, so to get back to your question about the process, reading became part of the process because I wanted to understand that. And so, just several great books that helped me sort of understand one, first, figuring out what's going on, acknowledging it and accepting it, then the breathing that I mentioned, and then, the uh, um, I've already mentioned this somatic walking, but I started also doing somatic tracking was another part of the process. I still do that regularly too, even
Hmm.
when I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling bad. Just because it's valuable. It really helps bring me back to center, and because I and that is that's the other thing I think that not to cut to the chase, but the I think all of these things that were in the process, I don't see as something that was a process to get me better. I see it as life changes that become part of just the way I live now because they've been valuable. They continue to be valuable, and I don't see that changing. That it's just so it's so while I wasn't looking for daily outcomes, uh, I did find a new way to sort of live each
Live
day.
your life.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
live life, and so in process life every day, and it is both physical and it's emotional, and it's and so I think what I really gained from a lot of the reading and the understanding that I gained from the course was, gee, yeah, I can't just live from the neck up. There sometimes I am feeling things in my body. And that's I know we've talked about Ron Frederick's book. That was a big book for me. Living like
So living like you mean it.
yeah, that was
I'll
a big
make sure to link to that in the description. This is a
yeah.
really great, helpful book about
Yeah.
emotions. Basics, just basics.
Because I probably wasn't I wasn't the best at identifying what was going on or allowing what I was feeling to process. I would was stifling it, and that ultimately I think does lead to the dizziness and the pain. It is a big part of the problem. And now it's funny, I've almost um, I, I we talked about journaling a little while ago. I have this thing I do now. I just call it mental journaling. I just will where journaling would allow me to walk through sort of what I was feeling. Now I can just sort of go through that sort of mentally, but thinking about letting the feelings completely process and rather than getting stuck, because I think that was a big issue for me.
Yeah. Well, and so many people live this way, the way that the neck up. That's another thing I credit to you. I feel like I've learned a lot from you, Scott, and how you've explained things. And I use them with everyone now. I don't even think about it anymore, but really I should credit you with them. But that is a very common way of living. And guys, like if you're out there and you're hearing this and you're like, I just that's how I always lived. Are you saying that in order to stay well, I'm gonna have to like not live that way anymore? So I feel like that's it's all about how we're framing this. And I say to people who ask me questions like that, and Scott, you tell me if you agree, something wasn't working for you before. Something was not working for you, your nervous system, your body, however you want to think about it. Something was causing your nervous system to be overly vigilant or overly on alert. And it responded to these symptoms in a way that not everyone's nervous system responds to symptoms. So we need to conduct a little bit of a postmortem and say, what wasn't working for me? And how might I need to change the way that I relate to myself, my feelings, my thoughts, my experiences in a sustainable, like non burdensome way? What you're describing, Scott, I want people to hear this, and you can please back me up on this. It's not like Scott has like a 20-minute routine every hour where he has to do parasympathetic breathing to keep the dizzies away. That's not what we're talking about. He 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 just kind of shifted the way he relates to his experiences, and he spends a little bit of time on maintenance. And but it doesn't sound, Scott, like your routine is this really burdensome thing.
Not at all. No, not at all. It's on the fly. It's totally on the fly. And I could be sitting in the middle of a meeting and doing breathing, and nobody knows. And it's not like yeah, I don't do it for 15 minutes. It's like for a couple minutes at tops.
Yeah.
Just to calm down. And yeah, it's very yeah, it's not burdensome at all. Although one thing I will say that's changed is and I think is through this whole process physically, I feel tons better than I ever felt. And so I do work out more. And I think that is a byproduct
Mhm.
of the
Mhm.
process is people do, they, feel better. And we kind of sort of learn the value of taking care of ourselves physically. The other thing you just said is reminded me of the notion of self-compassion and self-care because, a lot, I know me and certainly a lot of people who struggle with neural circuit dizziness are people pleasers, perfectionists, caretakers, and I fit that mold. And I'm really good at taking care of other people, but not really good at taking care of myself. And that I learned that here, and I do take good care of myself now. And the notion I try to follow is I'm going to take as good care of myself as I would those that I love and care for. And I tell you, that has been really, really good and helpful. And I joke about my bad golf game, but it's helped my golf game too because I'm spending more time doing the things I like to do and looking after my own wants, needs, and interests, which I
Yeah.
wasn't very good at before.
Yes. Okay. So now for my incredibly practical viewers or listeners who are hearing this and they're like, okay, oh my gosh, how do I like put that into practice? He did all these things, but I'm stuck in the thick of it. Like, so can you walk us through like what a sample day might have looked like when you were still really in the midst of recovery?
Yeah. Um, Early on, it was kind of intense. I had a schedule of when I wanted to do VRT, when I wanted to try to walk,
Mhm.
and um, so I did have some discipline around that, and I had some discipline around reading. I didn't remember, I don't think I really mentioned that, but reading I found to be extremely beneficial. Maybe the reading in itself, what I learned was beneficial, but I think it was beneficial just to hold a physical book and read lines of text.
That was actually probably quite rehabilitative. Yes, for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So early on, I was pretty disciplined about that, and I was disciplined about just going through the course. And yeah, I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself time wise. I felt like I had enough pressure physically, but it was I made it my priority. As I got better, I think I just tried to incorporate more life into it. One of my goals was to walk 18 holes of golf, and that was like starting in May of last year. That was a goal, and I got to that. I didn't get to 18. I did walk 9 pretty early, like June or July,
Mhm.
um, and it wasn't pretty, but I did it, and so I guess my point is I was trying to incorporate just things I used to do, and just to try to live life. Driving. It's a commonality that driving, while it can be difficult, can be also helpful. So I would go on drives just to feel better, because I did feel like 15 minutes of reprieve after a long drive. Um, but just trying to get back into work, as well. That was difficult, but it was helpful. Because there was a period probably from like January through March of last year. I was still struggling with the screen. So once that subsided, it became easier to incorporate a little bit more, yeah,
Mhm.
into that living part. Um, I'm trying to think what else.
So it sounds like I'm just going to pick out some of the things you said just to highlight for people. I have a video on what to do when your symptoms are constant and severe and you're just getting started. So I'll link to that video in the description. But it sounds like you did exactly what I talked about in that video, which is having a schedule that you can follow and not a like overly obsessive schedule that's like scheduled maybe down to the 5 minutes, although some of you may benefit from that too, but just kind of having a little bit of structure. Like I'm going to every day, each day, I'm going to do a thing, and it doesn't need to be unattainable. It doesn't need to be like I'm going to push myself like you went out on day one and said, okay, we're going to do 18 holes of golf come hell or high water. It's more like this is something I'm going to increase over time, but I'm going to focus first on just giving myself the consistency of doing this over time. And then as as you start to feel more comfortable and more courageous, even if the symptoms aren't changing yet, then you can start building in some more like life activities that you maybe haven't been able to do yet. And when were you doing, so you were already doing somatic walking. When did you start doing somatic tracking, like um without moving or in the midst of other activities?
Yeah, it wasn't too far. It was probably in the fall of last year, and I started doing
Okay.
systematic tracking, and that I was sort of doing that at the end of the day, which was a plus and a minus, because a lot of times I would fall asleep in the
Yeah,
middle of it.
which is fine. Mhm.
Yeah,
Hey,
but
I
I was
mean, yeah.
doing that a
So,
lot to end the day. The other thing, one other thing, I mentioned or our need to travel. Traveling was a good barometer. It was a good. It was something that it made me feel a little more human that I could travel. Wasn't always easy, especially earlier on. It was actually pretty difficult. Um, but by continuing to try, you use the word courage, and that's yeah, it does take some courage. And I that's one of the real benefits of being in the community is I think we share a lot of courage with each other, and it's helpful to hear what other people do and try and succeed at, because you're really psyched out early on that
Yeah,
and you gain courage as you try things.
exactly. I completely agree with you. It's certainly not a cult of positivity in our coaching group. It's we 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 have lots of room for people to feel bad. But there's always a big focus on what's going well, and enough people are sharing pictures and videos and stories of their wins that you kind of vicariously get courage through them, through seeing them and some of their wins. And we celebrate even the small things because we have these big negativity biases. This is how our brain works, right? I mean, your brain's always going to recognize and see and focus on the bad things and things not getting better. So you kind of need to work at noticing things that are getting better or are positive.
Yeah, it actually that makes me think of on a smaller scale, noticing. Just the word noticing. You use this word a lot, and I noticed you use it when we got into some of the group sessions. That the curiously noticing what's going on. That's another thing that I would say just sort of has become part of living. Just constantly. It's not something I think about doing. It's just something that I do from time to time when, you know, throughout the course of the day, you experience things, you feel things, you're thinking about things, but to stop and curiously notice what's going on inside my body. And you also use the word without judgment. One phrase you said was that I'll never forget is the what's important is how we respond to uh, um, our sensations. And in that response, that response is internal. It's something you feel internally, and but it's pretty easy just to get so busy, be in the midst of being so busy during the course of the day that you don't notice it. But if you but you feel something. So now every time if I feel something, I'll stop for just a brief second and say, what's
Right.
going on? And then I can deal with it and then go forward.
Right.
That's just that's really helpful.
That's a great skill to have. And I just want to differentiate this for people from constantly checking and monitoring. That's different. This has kind of a light touch, no judgment, just, oh, like, huh, my body's saying that. And it sounds like you're not spending time trying to interpret, analyze, or fix whatever it is that you're feeling. You're just noticing it and kind of relating to it kindly, right?
Yeah, that's a good word, the relating, because what I say now, my nervous system's no different than it was before. I just have a better relationship with it, and yeah, it's a really good word.
That's the recovery process really in a nutshell. I think I haven't said this in a while, but you probably heard me say this too. I repeat myself a lot, Scott. But it's kind of like in the process of recovering, you're trying to like kind of write yourself a handbook for your own nervous system so that you know how it runs and how to work with it rather than again what most people do living like neck up where you're just totally disconnected from what's going on. You're missing a lot of the signals. For most people, there's a happy medium between noticing, like in a very hypervigilant way, like constantly monitoring, and then just completely ignoring. And you're trying to find that sweet spot for yourself. Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, so you had these daily practices, and what did what did you do a little bit more digging on the emotional side of things? Once you realized, okay, I'm responding to my symptoms better, I'm responding to myself better, and I see people in the coaching group have asked me this question too. They're just doing such a beautiful job with those things. And they're like, I feel like there's still something I need to work on here.
Yeah.
So what did you do on that end?
Yeah, I mean, it's just well, obviously through the program, I mentioned the sort of the journaling and that kind of stuff. But I did start working with an outside therapist, and that was really helpful. My therapist specializes in AEDP and
Yes.
and
Shout out to ADP.
yeah,
Mhm.
and EMDR type therapy,
Mhm.
and you know, uh, it fits into the woo woo box, but really
Yep.
made sense to me. It made sense to me, and but it like I said at the outset, in the period before I started having sensations, something was going on. I was just too busy to deal with it or know what it
Mhm.
was, and it's funny looking back now and all of the different aspects of my life, things that were going on. Yeah, it's pretty easy to see. Wow, yeah, I was dealing with a lot of things, and I was dealing with them okay, but they were taking a toll, and I wasn't processing the emotional side. One thing I have to mention this, and this is I think you're aware. Um, July, I guess it was July of last year. I was diagnosed with prostate cancer and had
That's
surgery.
right.
And I think I was really fortunate that I had gotten as much out of the program I had by that time before I had surgery in October, because I cruised through it. I was very, and I really do credit what I what I learned here, because obviously I had what I'll call medical anxiety, and a big buildup. But that had fortunately that had ramped down considerably before I got into my cancer treatment, and so it was just barely a blip on the radar. I walked the golf course within 90 days of having my surgery, and so it, I think I don't know where I was. That had some correlation to the question you asked, but I can't remember exactly what the question was. But it was. I think it was how do I incorporate these things into living. But I was incorporating it at that point already, and now it's just sort of a regular part of daily activity.
Thank you for sharing it. I didn't want to, to go into a topic that can be so private for people, but uh, this is just such an important message for people to hear too, because another question that will often get is, are you saying that this is stress related? And that means every time I have stress, I'm going to suddenly have symptoms again. And the answer is resoundingly no. You went through an extreme period of stress. No. So on the contrary, my goal for you, for collective you, is to build resilience so that you deal with stress better than you ever have before. And that is, I mean, you're a walking testament to that totally being a possibility. So, I don't know if you have a clear, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 step process that may explain this, but what, what did the therapy help you hone? Like, what skills did the therapy help you develop more that you think were helpful?
Um, I think the biggest one is realizing, that how important my own personal care, and I use the word self-compassion a lot, because how important that was. And I didn't, because I didn't practice it, and I didn't and so therapy really helped me sort of zero in on that. And it also helped me understand that I could do that, um, and do that not to the exclusion of being compassionate and caring for others. In fact, it actually improved a lot of my relationships and aspects of life, because I was feeling better and doing better. Um, so I think just
So you didn't become a narcissistic jerk caring for yourself.
I hope not. I hope not. Although there were some times I think I did go a little bit overboard because
It's hard to find that middle.
because I
Yeah.
was enjoying myself. Yeah.
What do you say to people who are worried about losing their edge? Like who are worried about kind of treating their own experiences a little more gently, a little bit more like accept with a little more acceptance and are afraid that they won't be successful anymore.
Wow. What I would say, and I love the question, is I feel like today I'm finally the person I was supposed to be. And so that edge, I think I'm better than ever, honestly. I feel better. I feel like I'm more honest um, with myself and with others. Um, I think it's just made me sharper in a lot of different ways.
Mm. That's the what people think of as a paradox, but I hear this what you just said. I hear this from everyone who who's recovered and developed some of these skills and just being nicer to themselves overall and a little more caring toward themselves. So I mean, I offer this to people. Give it a try, see what happens. See if you become a lazy ne'er-do-well, as my grandma would say. Um, my grandma on my dad's side had some, she was from Ohio and she had some wonderful Midwesternisms, and that was one of them. Um,
You just made me think of one of my the favorite expressions that I can't take credit for it, but it's one I used a lot, and it's it, because I could be a person who could overanalyze things and worry about where what would happen, but I came to adopt the mantra of what if everything goes right, and I love that. I just love it. Because I'll approach things that maybe it's a challenging thing, or maybe it's just something as simple as going and run an errand that I don't want to do. Well, what if everything goes right? And it's a pretty cool mantra.
yes, another point of credit. You've made an impact on me, and you've made an impact on others. Like some of these lessons and these little sayings that you've had and you've contributed to me, to my, I guess, my toolkit, they now live in perpetuity in the neural circuit dizziness world. But that's it. What if everything goes right? And I love that because, Scott, I got a question yesterday and I should have used what you just said. This wonderful person who's dealing with a lot of anxiety said, I don't like using the word safe. I don't feel safe. Like, I don't want to say to myself, these symptoms are safe. They don't feel safe. I feel like really scared. And I said, you don't have to use the word safe. And I gave her a whole bunch of other suggestions, but I could have given her what you just said, because what if everything goes right doesn't mean that you're promising yourself or lying to yourself. It's just opening the possibility that things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, it made me think of one other thing because I think a lot of times we think about um, you safety or or feeling good as something that's extended or whatever. And I think it was what was it? Oh, the anxiety RX book, Russ Kennedy, is
Hmm.
and he had a question: Where am I right now? And and so you don't have to think about where I'm going to be 10 minutes from now or an hour from now. It's like, where am I right now? And I heard it put another way by Davey Martinez, the manager of the Washington Nationals: just be where your feet are. And and that, just the being present in a moment and being okay in that moment is a good starting point for
Yeah.
whether it's safety or whatever it is. It's just being there and being okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Little takeaway for people who are in the thick of it right now and feeling really awful. This is the first skill. Just being able to get yourself out of the stories and be present, even if it's uncomfortable. Just acknowledging to yourself something like, this is uncomfortable. And I'm just going to let it be uncomfortable for a few moments. And then maybe in a few moments, I won't let it be uncomfortable anymore and I'll fight it again. But just starting to practice allowing the feelings to happen and being present without letting the stories and the catastrophizing and the anxiety and the fear take over. Yeah. Yeah. Really, really, really great. So can I ask before I I want, of course, want to hear if you have other advice, because I know you've got so much great advice. But before we do that, I have a question about how your wife responded to this whole process. Because you were very practical. I imagine she, as a physician, is obviously immersed in the medical world. So what was this like for her to see you go through this process?
Yeah, really very interesting. She's she's a good doctor, and her practices internal medicine. And when I sort of stumbled upon triple PD, it was something she wasn't familiar with,
Mhm.
and I think it was confounding for her as it was for me, because she could see I was struggling, but that the big issue with people struggling with dizziness, you can't see it. It's that you look perfectly normal, looks like you can function, but the world's moving like crazy. So, at any rate, I think that um, it, it, I was able to share with her, some of what I was finding out. I think there is this issue in medical world that different specialists look for different things, ironically, one of the things happened early. It was probably I don't know, it was probably 2 or 3 months after I had sort of accepted triple PD as a diagnosis. That my wife actually saw a patient presented with the same symptoms, similar issues, and she actually followed that diagnosis for the first time. She may have had one other since then, but yeah, it's I think, and if you look at the sort of the history of triple PD as a diagnosis, you know, it's sort of a conglomeration of a lot of different diagnoses.
Mhm.
You suggested that it doesn't really matter how you get here. This kind of the same way out, or what it's called. But so I think it was, a kind of a revelation a little bit for her. I think it's still, you know, it it's there's still a lot to be learned from in the physical medicine world about um, uh, these types of issues. One way that she helped me quite a bit though was she practices at Walter Reed, and she told me that they had um, what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to think of the type of medicine that treats chronic pain. It's
Oh, well, it depends on who it is.
mind body.
Yeah, mind body. Okay.
Yeah,
That's what you
that
mean. Okay.
she shared with me that they actually had two mind body practitioners at Walter Reed. And as I looked at it, I also found out that Georgetown and Stanford have really good mind body
Mhm.
medical programs. So it's still new. It's but it's growing, and I think the more awareness there is of mind body medicine, and the better off we're all going to be in
That's
the long
right.
run, because it's real. It's
That's
definitely
right.
real. So
And it
so she helped me
starts
understand that.
it starts with with for those of you outside the United States, she's, an internal medicine specialist. So often people will see a physician with that specialty as their GP, general practitioner, or primary care provider. And so it starts with physicians who are more generalists because they're the ones who you're going to often see first when you're first dealing with symptoms. And this conversation, I love success story conversations always, but I I really feel that the tide is starting to change, just like you're saying. I think this is going to become a more accepted way of working with symptoms like these because it's just logical. It just like you can't treat someone as an ear. You are not an ear, Scott. And so and you're also not just a brain. You're there's more to you than that. And if we look at you as just like a collection of nerves, then we're going to miss important information because you function as a system. So looking at someone in a holistic way doesn't mean like woo. It just means saying, hey, what's going on in your life? What might be causing this person's nervous system to become a little bit more vigilant than it might otherwise have been? Why? Like we know the science is already there. It's just translating it into practice. And then, of course, I hope to see more collection of clinical evidence showing how much it helps people.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know this too. This is something I take really seriously, and for better or worse, I
This is
provided
great.
feedback to all the practitioners that I saw. Actually, you provided an information piece which was really well done, and I sent that back to all the doctors that I saw, just so if it makes one of them, you know more aware, and
Open.
they see a
Mhm.
patient. And to me, my hope in that was, having seen and met so many lovely people in the community who come into the community saying, I've been going through this for 10 years. That just breaks my heart. Be, you know because if the medical world, it becomes more attuned to this, maybe people don't suffer that long. Maybe they suffer, a,
Yeah,
a year, or anything that can speed up that process is
that's right.
is good.
So just to reiterate, in case people don't fully understand, Scott wrote a beautiful, kind, uh, informational, like letter that he sent out just with his story back to the entire list of physicians who he saw throughout this process. And it wasn't accusatory. It wasn't like you missed something. It was just like, hey, I saw you for this. Thank you so much for the support you gave me. I want you to know this is what ended up being the diagnosis, and this is what I did to get better. And I just want to give you this information in case it ever helps one of your patients. And then he sent the information sheets that I have available for download on my website, and along with his story. And this is, Scott, I'll tell you, as someone who kind of like has one foot into the medical space and one foot out at this point, but who was trained that way, that's the kind of message that would make me listen. Like, that's the kind of message that would make me pause and say, wow, maybe there's something to this. So I really encourage anyone who's found relief using the things that we do here and using the methods on my channel or what have you, communicating in a generous and kind way with the physicians who were there along your journey may actually really help other people. So please consider doing that. So, Scott, this has been a delightful conversation. I wanted to ask if you had any final words of advice, wisdom, or encouragement for people who are going through this right now.
Yeah, I think we've covered most of it. You mentioned celebrate the little wins, and
Mhm.
I've shared with the group many times. On a
Yeah,
good day, eat ice cream. It's yeah, it's and that sounds funny, but it's really what it's about is just marking progress, and communicating to our brains that we're making progress. And I think it's part of the brain retraining process is good feedback. And
yeah,
it's like you said, it's not just happy positivity. It is truly, sort of recreating the way the brain processes information, and that's what I've experienced. So yeah, but ice cream
yeah.
is a bad way to go.
That's right. And for those of you who are, maybe half listening and you're hearing this now and you're like, is he just saying he got better by thinking positive? That is not at all what he's saying. There were a lot of other things that you did that involve actually feeling a lot of very uncomfortable feelings and a lot of uncomfortable sensations, and dealing with a lot of like things that sometimes people shy away from because they're negative, but at the same time also deliberately finding things that are useful, meaningful things that you're grateful for. That's really good advice, Scott. Thank you. Thank you. And also, thank you for all the mentoring that you did in the group. For those of you who don't know, we have a small group of volunteers in the coaching group who take newbies under their wing and just kind of help them up, just get oriented. That's a funny word, but they just kind of help them figure out where to get started and just help with technology because screens can be tricky when you're dealing with dizziness and all that stuff. And Scott, you made such a difference in so many people's lives, including mine. And I'm just so, so grateful to know you. Thank you. And thank you for this conversation.
First of all, you're welcome. It was my pleasure. I've met so many wonderful people through this community, and the experiences that I had talking to people, it just blew me away. People all over the world, and that tells you how this goes everywhere. It's not just Washington D.C. or Florida. It's people everywhere are experience this, and I developed so many just great relationships with people everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That it was valuable to my healing to work with people and you and your team. Yeah, it's amazing how something that was started so miserable, it was just became really one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced in my life. And yeah, so I don't want to get too high flying here, but this, um, yeah, it's been very good.
It's true what they say, jerks don't end up with chronic dizziness. So if you meet someone else who's going through this, chances are they're like one of the best people you'll ever meet. That's at least what we've observed. Yeah.
It's a wonderful group of people for sure.
Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much again for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for everything else. I could thank you over and over again, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna do my little YouTube thing. Okay. So folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I know you did, and I know you got a lot out of that conversation. We love hearing from you. So please let us know if you have questions or comments, drop them below. You can also like, share, subscribe to the channel. These things help me reach more people. And I know some of you, actually many of you, are now listening to this also as a podcast. So it would be wonderful if you could leave us a 5-star rating and review. That helps us reach more people. And you can also follow the podcast. All right. Thank you, everyone. Special thanks to you, Scott, and we will see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.